What other failed cinematic universes could I use to keep this channel series afloat? What did they try to do? What of The Amazing Spider-Man? As is well known, this is the film series that emerged after the cancellation of the series directed by Sam Raimi, which had Mark Webb at the helm and Andrew Garfield as the protagonist. And as in all stories of this nature, it is the Avengers who ruin everything except their own universe. Like all companies at the time, after the huge success that was Avengers in 2012, Sony panicked and wanted to rush to create a cinematic universe based on this franchise. I think I've said that 1,000 times in other videos. I'm not plagiarizing other YouTubers, but I am plagiarizing myself. This led to Sony giving the green light to a bunch of spin-offs and projects that would further complicate the already complicated franchise of The Amazing Spider-Man, rather than following a linear structure.
Sony decided to follow a phase-style plan for their new cinematic universe that had been laid out for them by a man named Juan Capday. He recommended that they plan their universe out and model it after the MCU-style phases. Sony would serve as producers and occasionally directors on all future Amazing Spider-Man projects following The Amazing Spider-Man 2. This would include Amy Pascal, Avi Arad, Matt Tolmach, Mark Webb, Alex Kurtzman, Roberto Orsi.
Alright, strap in, because The Amazing Spider-Man 2 wasn't just planning for a third, but a whole cinematic universe set within this world. The Amazing Spider-Man 3 was planned and had a release date slated for June 10, 2016. However, this later got pushed back to 2018 when Sony decided to make a Sinister Six movie first. But not just one movie, the film was set to be a two-parter, with the first being released on November 11, 2016. Drew Goddard was attached to write and direct this movie, which was said to pick up directly where The Amazing Spider-Man 2 left off. However, there are conflicting reports as to whether Andrew Garfield would be in one part, both parts, or neither. The end credits of The Amazing Spider-Man 2 hinted at the lineup, which would include Vulture, Green Goblin, Doc Ock, Mysterio, Kraven, and Rhino, but apparently this wasn't necessarily going to be the final team. While plot details haven't been confirmed, there were rumoured ideas where Harry Osborn would be leading the team with the goal of destroying humanity and going on a mission to recover an alien meteor, which would later be revealed to be Venom. Osborn wanted the symbiote, but Spider-Man would be the one who unintentionally bonds with it before finding the Sinister Six. Other ideas included Doc Ock betraying the group and going rogue, leading to the remaining five battling against him with Spider-Man's assistance. There was also the possibility of having the Sinister Six team being controlled by the government, determining when and where to enlist their services. This is a similar idea to what would end up being used in another 2016 movie. It was even said that the story would have a redemption arc for the characters. Despite this film being set in Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man universe, Drew Goddard has said that the script could be tweaked to work in any universe, whether it be Andrew's, Tom's, or a separate world altogether. So following the Sinister Six two-parter would be The Amazing Spider-Man 3. Not much is known about the plot, other than some surface level ideas, which would focus on Peter coming to terms with Gwen's death. George Stacy actor, Dennis Leary, said in 2015 that Peter would have developed a formula to bring back people in his life who have died, including Gwen Stacy and Captain Stacy. Amazing Spider-Man 1 and 2 director, Mark Webb, also confirmed that he wanted Chris Cooper to return to be the film's main villain. So basically anyone who died in the previous movies would come back to life. Except Uncle Ben. There was also talks about having The Amazing Spider-Man 3 be released before the two-part Sinister Six films. Peter would get the black symbiote costume in The Amazing Spider-Man 3, be wearing it in part 1 of Sinister Six, before being separated from it and latching onto Eddie, becoming Venom in part 2. This would then lead to a Venom spin-off film, so even the spin-offs would be spinning off spin-offs. Try to say that 5 times fast. The spin-offs would not failed immediately. Black Cat, Silver Sable, Stunner, Firestar, and Spider-Woman were some other characters considered to either lead or team up in a movie set in the Amazing Spider-Man universe. Black Cat makes the most Spidey sense, seeing as though she was introduced in The Amazing Spider-Man 2, played by Felicity Jones. Spider-Man 2099 was planned to be released in late 2017, which was set to be set in 2099 New York, following Miguel O'Hara as Spider-Man going up against the corporation Alchemax. Setting a movie in 2099 would have made it difficult to connect to the Amazing Spider-Man universe, except the idea was to have Morlun as the villain, who travels across the multiverse killing spider variants, so this could be that link to Andrew's world. Now, I'm not sure if this next idea would be the same movie or a different film, but eventually Miguel and Peter's Spider-Man would team up and battle Cletus Cassidy. And finally, back in 2014, there was also talks of a Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield crossover Spider-Man film. It was initially going to have the two characters fighting against each other before teaming up to battle a greater threat. But that's pretty much all the information we have on that.
Jeff Pinkner, and Drew Goddard. Our story begins with the Amazing Spider-Man Kraven. It would be an interquel set between the events of the first two movies. Peter would still be in his senior year of high school and would still be dating Gwen Stacy. Now in this movie, Peter would start feeling the guilt about dating Gwen, despite the promise that he made to Captain Stacy at the end of the first movie. And he apparently would have broken up and gotten back together with Gwen at least once in this movie, because yeah, I mean, we didn't see that enough in The Amazing Spider-Man 2. No, we need more of that. So now meanwhile, the main villains would have been Chris Cooper's Norman Osborn and Kraven the Hunter, who might have been played by Shane West. Norman would be dying from the Osborn family curse, and he would hire Kraven to track down and capture Spider-Man, because he's convinced that his blood would help to cure him of his disease. Kraven succeeds at capturing Spider-Man, and Norman discovers his secret identity. He uses Peter's blood, only for it to turn him into an Ultimate Spider-Man version of Green Goblin, who Spider-Man would then defeat. Norman would retreat and return to his human form, but finds his disease has accelerated. So he calls for Harry to return to New York, thus setting up the events of TASM 2. And this fight with the Green Goblin would have helped to explain why Peter refused to give Harry his blood in The Amazing Spider-Man 2, since he'd already seen what it did to his father. Dr. Miles Warren, who would have been Peter's college professor since The Amazing Spider-Man 3, would be revealed as a former Oscorp employee that held a faraway crush on Gwen Stacy, and yeah, it's just as creepy as it sounds, believe me. Now when she died, he tried in vain to clone her several times, and failing this, he would grow to hate and blame Spider-Man even for her death. Thus he would clone two new Spider-Men to do his bidding, aka Kane Parker and Scarlet Spider. They would have framed Peter for crimes he didn't commit before trying to kill him. However, Scarlet Spider would have a change of heart and assist Spider-Man in defeating Kane. Warren, out of desperation, would turn himself into a human-jackal hybrid, but would still end up being defeated in the end. Coming in after the events of The Amazing Spider-Man Carnage, Spider-Man 2099 would have been stuck in the early 21st century and would be desperate to return to his own time. So he would end up meeting his own grandfather, Tiberius Stone, who he'd have to protect from Scorpions. Coming in after the events of The Amazing Spider-Man Carnage, Spider-Man 2099 would have been stuck in the early 21st century and would be desperate to return to his own time. So he would end up meeting his own grandfather, Tiberius Stone, who he'd have to protect from Scorpion, who's now trying to kill him in order to reset the timeline. While it's never stated if Miguel would make it back to his own time or not, this movie would have explored the moral grayness of whether he should abandon the 2010s, despite them still needing his help, or if he should leave 2099 New York behind to be further terrorized by Alchemax. The overarching
Spider-Man 4 would have seen Peter Parker fight against the Sinister Six. There was about 6 Amazing Spider-Man films that were planned, along with the consideration of making an Aunt May prequel.
plans would have possibly included a Spider-Woman and or Spider-Girl movie, further Venom and Sinister Six sequels, and a team-up movie with Black Cat and Silver Sable. Sony, even this far back, were also hoping to eventually make standalone movies based on Morbius and Jackpot. However, as we all know, none of these movies ever saw the light of day. The Amazing Spider-Man 2 disappointed both at the box office and with critics, and after initially planning to continue the Amazing Spider-Man universe anyway, they ultimately saw more profit in another reboot, this time as part of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, with Tom Holland in the lead role.